I shouldn't have been on the Blue Ridge Parkway that late, but I told myself it was fine. I'd driven it dozens of times before, always during the day, always with the windows down and music playing, stopping at overlooks to take pictures like everyone else. That night was different. Work had run late, my phone was nearly dead, and I just wanted to get home without detouring an extra hour through town. The sun had dipped behind the mountains faster than I expected, and by the time I reached the higher elevations, the road felt narrower somehow, like the darkness had pulled everything inward. At first, the drive was quiet in a way I found comforting. No traffic, no music, just the low hum of my tires and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The mountains loomed on either side, black shapes stacked against an even darker sky. I remember thinking how quickly the parkway changes once the tourists leave. It stops being a postcard and starts feeling like something older, something that doesn't care whether you're there or not. The fog rolled in without warning. One second I could see the road stretching ahead of me. The next, my headlights were cutting into a wall of white that swallowed everything more than 20 feet out. It wasn't the gentle kind of fog you expect up there, either. It was thick and heavy, clinging to the pavement, swirling low over the hood of my car. I slowed down instinctively, knuckles tightening on the steering wheel, eyes locked on the faint yellow lines guiding me forward. That's when I noticed the headlights. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, my own lights bouncing back at me through the fog. But then they moved. Two dull, yellowish orbs appeared behind me, hovering just above the pavement in my rearview mirror. They were too close. Closer than anyone should be driving on a road like that, especially in those conditions. I felt a flicker of irritation mixed with unease. Whoever it was, they were riding my bumper. I sped up slightly, hoping they'd fall back. The headlights stayed exactly where they were. I slowed for a curve, easing into it carefully. They slowed too, never drifting farther away, never closing the gap. It was like they were tethered to me. I couldn't see the vehicle itself, no outline, no grille, no windshield, just the lights, warped and distorted by the fog, floating in the darkness behind me. 10 minutes passed like that. 10 minutes of my heart thudding in my ears, every sense dialed up too high. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting at any moment for the shape of a car to emerge, but it never did. The parkway felt endless, the curves blending together, the fog pressing in so tight it felt like I was driving through a tunnel suspended over nothing. I told myself it was probably just another driver, as tired and uncomfortable as I was. Maybe their headlights were dim, maybe the fog was playing tricks on my depth perception. Appalachia has a way of making you doubt your own senses if you let it. Still, something about the way those lights matched me exactly made my skin crawl. When I spotted a scenic overlook sign looming out of the fog, relief washed over me. I signaled and pulled in, gravel crunching under my tires. The idea was simple. Let them pass, take a breath, then get back on the road. As I slowed to a stop, the headlights followed me into the overlook. They didn't swing wide or pull up alongside me. They stopped directly behind my car, close enough that the rear of my vehicle glowed faintly in their light. Then they shut off. Not dimmed, not turned away, off. Complete darkness swallowed the overlook. I sat there with my engine idling, hands shaking, staring into my rearview mirror, where the lights had been a second earlier. I waited for a door to open, for an engine to idle, for some sign of another person nearby. There was nothing, just the wind moving through the trees, carrying the damp, earthy smell of wet leaves and moss. I cracked my window an inch, just enough to listen. That was when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, crunching softly on the gravel, not rushed, not hesitant. They moved around my car in a wide circle, each step measured, like whoever it was knew exactly where I was sitting. I froze, barely breathing, afraid that any sound I made would draw their attention. I couldn't see anything through the fog-darkened windows, just vague shadows and shifting white beyond the glass. The footsteps stopped near my driver's side door. I waited for a knock that never came. Seconds stretched into something longer, heavier. My mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Maybe they needed help. Maybe their car had broken down. But something deep in my gut told me that if I rolled down my window or opened my door, I wouldn't like what happened next. I slammed my foot on the gas. The engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as I shot back onto the parkway. Adrenaline drowned out everything else. I didn't look back until I'd gone a quarter mile down the road. When I finally dared to glance at my mirror, There was nothing there. No headlights, no car, just fog and darkness swallowing the road behind me. I drove the rest of the parkway in a haze, my eyes flicking constantly between the road ahead and the mirror behind. Every time the fog thickened, I felt my chest tighten, waiting for those lights to reappear. Sometimes I thought I saw them, faint reflections, brief flashes of yellow in the glass, but when I focused, there was nothing. I made it home just before dawn, exhausted and shaken. I tried to tell myself it was nothing more than a tired mind and a bad stretch of road. Appalachia is full of stories, and I didn't want to add my own to the pile. Still, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those headlights hovering in the fog, patient and close. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I stopped at a small diner near the parkway, the kind of place where locals gather early in the morning. I didn't go in planning to tell anyone what happened, but the words slipped out anyway when the waitress asked how my drive had been. She went quiet, her expression tightening in a way that made me wish I'd kept my mouth shut. An older man at the counter turned around and asked me where exactly it happened. When I told him the mile marker, he nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that answer. He said people talk about lights up there, headlights that follow drivers late at night, especially when the fog rolls in heavy. He said some folks think it's a drunk driver who died years back, still pacing the road the way he did the night he went over the edge. Others think it's something simpler and worse, someone living off the parkway, using the fog to scare people into stopping. What do they want? I asked, my coffee going cold in my hands. He shrugged. Company maybe, or a ride. I laughed weakly, but no one else did. That should have been the end of it. I avoided the parkway at night after that, taking longer routes without complaining. Life went on. Months passed. Then one evening, a storm rolled through unexpectedly, knocking out power across the county. I was coming home later than usual again, and without really thinking about it, I turned onto the parkway. Old habits die hard. The fog was already there, waiting. It felt thicker this time, heavier, like it recognized me. I kept my speed steady, eyes forward, telling myself not to check the mirrors. When I finally did, my stomach dropped. The headlights were back. Same color, same distance, same silent pacing. I whispered no to the empty car and sped up. They stayed with me. The curves tightened, the fog closing in until the road felt impossibly narrow. Panic clawed up my throat. I told myself not to pull over, not to give them the chance. But my hands were slick with sweat, my grip slipping. I don't know how long I drove like that. Time stretched and warped, every second dragging. Finally, through the fog, I saw the outline of a cabin just off the road. Lights glowing warm and steady. Relief surged through me. Someone else was awake. Someone else was there. I slowed, signaling, ready to turn in. In my mirror, the headlights surged closer than they ever had before, filling the glass with yellow light. The message was clear, in a way words never could. I straightened the wheel and drove past the cabin, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The headlights vanished just as suddenly as before. I didn't stop until I reached town, until streetlights and other cars surrounded me. When I finally parked at home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I've driven past that stretch of the parkway during the day since then. I've looked for the overlook, for the cabin, for anything that might explain what happened. Everything looks normal in the sunlight, peaceful even. But sometimes, late at night, when fog creeps in low over the hills, I catch myself checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see those lights again. Because whatever followed me that night didn't feel finished. It felt patient, like it knows the road will eventually bring me back. I'd been on the Blue Ridge Parkway for close to an hour when the radio cut out. Not all at once, just faded into a wash of static like someone slowly turning a dial. I barely noticed at first. Signals come and go up there, especially once you climb higher and the mountains start stacking on top of each other. I reached over, tapped the radio once, and let it be. The silence felt better anyway. It matched the road. It was late enough that the parkway had emptied out completely. No headlights ahead, none behind me. Just the steady glow of my beams stretching across the pavement and vanishing into darkness. The forest on either side felt thick and close, pressing in beyond the guardrails. I remember thinking how different it felt at night, like the mountains weren't scenery anymore, but something living that had turned its attention toward me. The static crackled again, louder this time. I frowned and adjusted the volume, expecting music to bleed back in. Instead, a voice slipped through the noise. Low, calm, almost gentle. "Daniel." I laughed out loud, sharp and nervous, the sound too loud inside the car. My name echoed and died quickly. I told myself it was my imagination, my brain pulling familiar sounds out of meaningless noise. That happens when you're tired. I hadn't slept much the night before, and work had wrung me out. I kept driving, eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. "Daniel," the voice said again, clearer this time. My smile faded. The voice didn't sound like a DJ or an automated system. It wasn't distorted the way radio voices usually are. It sounded like someone sitting close to the microphone, speaking carefully, like they didn't want to startle me. I glanced at the dashboard clock, then at the radio display. No station, just static. I reached for the power button, but before I could press it, the voice spoke again. "Slow down, curve ahead." I almost ignored it, almost. Then something in the tone made me ease off the gas, just a little. My foot hovered over the brake as the road bent sharply to the right. As my headlights swept around the curve, they caught twisted metal just off the shoulder. A car lay half down the embankment, steam curling up from the hood like breath in cold air. Fresh skid marks cut across the pavement. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. If I hadn't slowed down, I would have been right on top of it. I pulled over a little farther down the road, hands shaking, chest tight. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal, not even enough to fake a call. I sat there for a minute, listening to my own breathing, trying to understand what had just happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was coincidence. Lucky timing, nothing more. I got back on the road. The static returned after a few minutes, softer this time, like it was waiting. I turned the radio off completely, but the noise kept bleeding through, thin and persistent. Then the voice came back. "Tree down," it said. "Stay left." I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to acknowledge it. But when my headlights caught the fallen tree blocking half the road, I felt my stomach drop. I swerved left, heart pounding, missing the jagged branches by inches. I didn't laugh that time. The pattern continued. A deer stepped into the road just after the voice warned me. Loose gravel skidded under my tires where it said it would. Every time, the voice was right, calm, unemotional, like it was reading from a list. I stopped trying to turn the radio off. I stopped arguing with myself. I just listened. Between warnings, the static filled the car, a constant hiss that crawled under my skin. I tried to speak once, asking who it was, but my voice sounded small and foolish, swallowed by the noise. The voice didn't respond. It only spoke when it had something to tell me. Eventually, it said something different. "Pull over at mile marker 312. The words hit me harder than the warnings had. I felt a jolt of fear, sharp and immediate. I shook my head without thinking, like the voice could see me. "No," I said. My throat was dry. "I'm not stopping." The static grew louder, surging until it nearly drowned out the engine. The voice returned, and for the first time, the calm cracked. "Pull over," it said again, sharper, insistent. I kept driving. The radio dial twitched under my fingers. Then it spun on its own, clicking through empty stations before slamming back into static. The voice came back louder than before, no longer patient. "You have to stop." "I don't," I said, my hands white on the wheel. "I'm almost through." The static screamed, a wall of sound that made my ears ache. The voice cut through it, strained now, like it was shouting from far away. "If you don't stop, you won't hear me anymore." Something about that chilled me. Not the threat, but the sadness underneath it, the sense of urgency, like it wasn't trying to scare me, like it was trying to help. Still, I didn't pull over. The static cut out abruptly, leaving the car in heavy silence. I waited for the voice to return, my pulse hammering. It didn't. The road stretched on, dark and empty. I drove the rest of the parkway without another word, every mile heavier than the last. When I finally reached the end, I pulled into a well-lit gas station and sat there for a long time, hands still shaking, watching other people move around like the world hadn't almost tilted off its axis. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't trust myself to explain it. The next day, I couldn't let it go. Curiosity gnawed at me, sharp and persistent. I sat at my computer and searched for accidents near mile marker 312. It didn't take long. The article was years old, A local man had been killed there while trying to warn drivers about dangerous curves during a heavy fog. He'd parked his truck on the shoulder and used a CB radio to call out warnings. The radio malfunctioned. No one heard him in time. A car clipped him, sending him over the guardrail. He died before help arrived. There was a grainy photo attached to the article. A roadside memorial, flowers, a rusted sign. I stared at it longer than I meant to. I told myself that was the explanation. My brain had filled in the gaps. Stress, exhaustion, the power of suggestion. I shut the laptop and went on with my life. For a while, it worked. Months passed. Then one night, a storm rolled through without warning. Sheets of rain hammered the windows, knocking out power across half the county. I was coming home late again, cutting through the parkway because the back roads were flooded. As I climbed higher, fog began to roll in, thick and low. The radio stayed quiet longer than I expected. I almost relaxed. Then the static returned. I didn't wait for the voice. I turned the radio off, then yanked the fuse out entirely, plunging the dashboard into darkness. The static kept whispering, faint but present, like it was coming from inside the car itself. "Daniel." I swallowed hard. "I know," I said. "I hear you." The voice sounded closer this time, tired. "Slow down," it said. "They're ahead." "Who?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The static swelled, then fell back. "Doesn't matter." My headlights caught movement on the shoulder, shapes that darted back into the trees when the light touched them. I slowed instinctively, heart racing. The road ahead looked wrong somehow, uneven, like it had been disturbed. "Pull over," the voice said again. "Please." I glanced at the mile markers as they slid past. 309, 310. My chest tightened. "I can't," I said. "I'm not stopping there." Silence. The next curve came too fast. My headlights swept across the road, and suddenly it wasn't there. The pavement dropped away into darkness, the edge jagged and broken. I slammed the brakes, tires screaming, stopping inches from the collapse. My whole body shook as adrenaline flooded my veins. "Now," the voice said softly. I pulled over. I don't know why. Exhaustion, gratitude, fear, maybe all of it. The car idled, rain pattering against the roof, fog curling around the hood like something alive. The static faded until there was nothing but the sound of the storm. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. When I finally stepped out of the car, the air felt heavy, charged. I walked to the edge of the road and looked down into the darkness where the pavement had fallen away. Far below, I thought I heard voices carried up on the wind, muffled and distant, like people calling for help from somewhere they couldn't escape. I got back in my car and drove away before dawn. I don't take the parkway at night anymore. Not ever. Sometimes, when storms roll in and fog settles low over the hills, my radio crackles on its own, even when the car is off. I don't listen. I don't want to know what else it has to say. But part of me wonders if the voice is still out there, calling warnings into the static, hoping someone will finally stop and listen. I didn't plan to be on the parkway that night. I never do when it gets that late, but plans fall apart easy in the mountains, especially when you tell yourself you've done this drive 100 times and nothing's ever happened before. Midnight came and went somewhere behind me, swallowed up by trees and fog and the steady glow of my headlights cutting into the dark. The Blue Ridge at night feels different than it does during the day. In daylight, it's scenic, open, forgiving. At night, it closes in. The trees crowd the road like they're leaning closer to hear something. The curves feel tighter, sharper, and the guardrails don't look strong enough to keep anything from going over the edge. There were no other cars, no headlights ahead or behind me, just the low hum of my engine and the faint hiss of tires on pavement. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet, the kind that makes you too aware of your own breathing. I came around a blind curve too fast. Not reckless fast, but faster than I should have been given how little I could see ahead. That's when she appeared in my headlights. She was standing dead still in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked and bit into my shoulder. The tires screamed, the sound sharp and panicked, echoing off the trees. The car skidded, then stopped just a few feet from her. My heart was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I remember gasping, sucking in air like I'd been underwater. She didn't move. She didn't flinch or raise her hands or step back the way anyone would if a car came at them like that. She just stood there, centered in my headlights, staring straight at me. Her eyes were dark and sunken, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair clung to her face and neck, soaked and stringy, plastered to her skin like she'd been out in the rain for hours. The first thing I thought was that she was hurt. The second was that she was drunk or disoriented. People wander onto roads up there sometimes. Hikers get lost. Locals cut through places they shouldn't. I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. I rolled down my window, the motor whining loud in the silence. Cold air poured in, carrying the smell of wet leaves and earth. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a step toward my car. That's when my headlights dipped just enough for me to see her feet. She was barefoot. Her feet were filthy, blackened with dirt and streaked with blood. Thin lines ran from her toes back across the pavement where she'd been standing, like she'd walked a long way on raw skin. The blood looked fresh, wet. My stomach twisted. "Don't come any closer," I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to sound steady. She stopped, just a few feet from my hood, close enough that I could see the way her chest barely moved when she breathed. Close enough to notice how wrong her posture was, like she was holding herself together by habit rather than strength. I reached for my phone without taking my eyes off her. My fingers fumbled, slick with sweat. When I finally got it in my hand, the screen stayed black. I pressed the button again. Nothing. No glow. No vibration. Dead. A cold wave of fear rolled through me then, heavier than anything I'd felt so far. I looked back up at her. She was smiling. It wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't even the kind of smile someone gives when they're trying to reassure you. It was wide and stiff and wrong, stretching her mouth too far, pulling at her cheeks like she was practicing an expression she didn't quite understand. Her eyes didn't change at all. They stayed hollow, fixed on me, unblinking. Every instinct I had started screaming at once. I don't remember making a decision. I just hit the gas. The car lurched forward, swerving around her as I tore past, tires chirping as they fought for traction. I didn't look back right away. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly to trust myself, to steer if I did. When I finally forced myself to check the rearview mirror, my chest tightened. She was still there. She stood in the road for a moment, watching my taillights shrink. Then, slowly, calmly, she turned and walked off the pavement and into the trees. The forest swallowed her almost instantly, her pale shape dissolving into darkness between the trunks like she'd never been there at all. I kept driving. I told myself I'd stop at the next ranger station. I told myself I'd call it in as soon as I got a signal. I told myself I wasn't a coward, that I'd done the right thing, that pulling over could have made things worse. None of it sounded convincing, even in my own head. The road stretched on, empty and quiet. Every shadow looked like movement. Every curve made my pulse spike. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see her standing in the road behind me, or worse, walking along the shoulder, keeping pace somehow. 10 miles later, my headlights caught something on the side of the road. A white wooden cross. I slowed without meaning to. Flowers lay at its base, some already wilting, others still bright and fresh. A photo was tied to the cross with twine, fluttering slightly in the night breeze. I pulled over before I could stop myself, gravel crunching under my tires. I didn't want to get out of the car. I don't know why I did. Curiosity maybe, or guilt, or that awful need to prove to myself that what I'd seen hadn't been what I thought it was. I stepped out and walked toward the cross, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. When the light hit the photo, my knees went weak. It was her. Same face, same hollow eyes, same soaked clothes clinging to her frame, same smile. I stared at the date printed beneath the photo until the numbers blurred. 2 nights earlier, hit and run, time of death, just past midnight, right where I'd seen her standing. I backed away slowly, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I got back in my car and drove the rest of the way home on autopilot, my mind replaying the moment over and over again. The brakes screaming, her stepping closer, that smile. I didn't sleep that night. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize it. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe someone who knew her was out there, dressed like her, trying to make a point. Maybe I'd misjudged the timing. Maybe exhaustion had filled in gaps my memory didn't want to face. But deep down, I knew better. I went back during the day a week later. Sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the road in soft gold. The spot where she'd stood looked ordinary, safe. The memorial was still there, flowers replaced with fresh ones. Someone had been visiting. I asked around. At a gas station not far from the parkway, I mentioned the accident. The clerk nodded slowly, his expression tightening. He said she'd been walking home after her car broke down. Cell service was spotty. No one knows why she'd been in the road. No one knows who hit her. She doesn't like being ignored, he added quietly. I asked him what he meant. He hesitated, then shrugged. People say she shows up sometimes. Late, when it's quiet, stands in the road like she's waiting. I didn't press him. I didn't want to hear more. I avoided the parkway at night after that. Took longer routes, left earlier, made excuses. Life moved on, or at least pretended to. Until one night, months later, when a storm knocked out power across the county and flooded the back roads, I found myself staring at the entrance to the parkway again. Rain streaking down my windshield, my stomach tight with dread. I told myself it wouldn't happen twice. The drive felt heavier from the start. Fog crept low over the road, clinging to the pavement. My headlights felt weak against it. Every curve slowed me down, my foot hovering over the brake. Then I saw her again. Same spot, same posture, same soaked clothes. This time, I didn't slam the brakes. I stopped smoothly, controlled, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. She looked at me, her expression almost expectant. "I'm sorry," I whispered through the glass. "I don't know why." The words just came out. She took a step closer. I put the car in reverse and backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact. Her smile spread again, that same wide, wrong curve of her mouth. When I finally turned around and drove off, I didn't check the mirror. I don't know what she wants. I don't know if stopping would make things better or worse. All I know is that some nights, when rain taps against my windows and fog rolls in low, I dream of her standing in the road, waiting for someone to finally do what I couldn't. And every morning I wake up grateful that I'm still here, even if I'm not sure I deserve to be. I first noticed the sound just before sunset, when the parkway was starting to empty out and the light was turning that washed-out orange that makes everything look flatter than it really is. I'd been driving for a while, long enough that my shoulders ached and my eyes felt dry. The mountains rolled by in layers, darkening as the sun slid lower, and the road curved gently ahead of me like it always does. That's when I heard a low, steady hum coming from somewhere behind my car. At first, I didn't think much of it. The parkway carries sound in strange ways. Engines echo off the hillsides, and sometimes you hear vehicles long before you see them. I checked my rearview mirror out of habit. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no silhouettes, just pavement stretching back into the trees. The sound didn't change. It didn't get louder or softer. It didn't rev or fade. It just stayed there, perfectly steady, like an engine idling at a constant speed. I told myself it had to be my own car, maybe something in the drivetrain, maybe the tires humming on the asphalt. Still, I shifted in my seat, uneasy. I rolled down my window a few inches, letting the cool mountain air rush in. The sound was clearer then. Definitely not wind, definitely not tires. It had a mechanical quality to it, a low-frequency vibration you feel more than hear. I checked the mirrors again. Nothing. The parkway curved left, then right, the road dipping and rising with the land. The hum followed every curve, matching my speed so precisely it felt intentional. When I eased off the gas slightly, it didn't close the distance. When I accelerated, it didn't fall behind. It just stayed there, just out of sight. My pulse picked up. I told myself not to spiral. The mountains mess with your head if you let them. I'd grown up around them, but that didn't mean they couldn't still get under my skin. I focused on the road, on the way the shadows were starting to pool between the trees. After a few minutes, I started to feel ridiculous. I laughed once, sharp and humorless, the sound swallowed up by the car. "Get it together," I muttered to myself. "You're tired." That was when I pulled over. It wasn't planned. I just saw a small gravel pull-off ahead and turned into it without thinking. The tires crunched as I rolled to a stop. I put the car in park and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was almost shocking. Except it wasn't silent. The hum continued. It was still behind me, idling at the same steady pitch, close enough that I could feel it in my chest. My stomach dropped. I stared at the empty road ahead of me, then slowly checked the mirrors again. The pull-off was empty. The parkway behind me was empty. Trees pressed in on all sides, dark and still. I sat there, holding my breath, listening. The sound didn't waver. It didn't drift. It just was. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. I don't know what I expected, maybe to finally see headlights appear, or the outline of a vehicle pulling up behind me. I cracked the door open. The humming stopped instantly. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the noise had been. It left my ears ringing, my skin prickling like I'd just stepped into a colder room. I leaned forward, peering out through the windshield and side mirrors, scanning the road and the trees beyond it. Nothing moved. I got back in the car and shut the door hard, my heart pounding. I didn't sit there long. I started the engine and pulled back onto the parkway, my hands tight on the wheel. The rest of the drive passed in uneasy silence. No hum, no echo, just my own engine and the soft hiss of tires on pavement. But I couldn't relax. Every shadow felt heavier. Every curve made my breath catch. I kept expecting the sound to come back, to bloom up behind me again like it had never left. It didn't. By the time I reached home, night had fully settled in. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I told myself it was over, that whatever I'd heard had been a fluke, fatigue, imagination, anything but what it felt like. I went inside and slept poorly, waking up more than once with the sensation that something was right outside, idling in the dark. The next morning, sunlight did little to ease the tension coiled in my chest. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee and froze when I saw my car. Deep scratches ran along both sides, long and uneven, cutting through the paint like someone had dragged metal or stone along the doors. They weren't random, they were parallel, spaced just far enough apart to suggest something wide had brushed past me again and again. I stood there for a long time, staring, trying to remember if I'd scraped against a guardrail or a tree, but I would have felt that, I would have heard it. And the scratches ran the length of the car, from front fender to rear, as if whatever made them had kept pace with me. I took the car to a ranger station later that day, partly to report the damage, and partly because I needed to tell someone what had happened. The ranger listened without interrupting, his expression neutral but attentive. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You heard it," he said. I blinked. "Heard what?" He hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. "Locals call it the shadow driver," he said. "Not an official thing, just stories." "What kind of stories?" I asked, though part of me already knew. He folded his hands. "People hear a vehicle behind them on the parkway. No lights, no shape, just sound. Sometimes they pull over, sometimes they don't. Either way, the road doesn't always give them a choice." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Unexplained wrecks," he said finally. "Cars found off the side of the road with no skid marks. Drivers who swear someone ran them off, but there's no evidence of another vehicle. No paint transfer, no witnesses." I thought of the scratches on my car. "Why me?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "If you hear it," he said, "you're lucky. It means it didn't choose you." I left the station feeling colder than when I'd gone in. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the idea lodged itself deep, refusing to let go. Every drive after that felt different. I listened too closely. I checked my mirrors too often. Months passed. Life moved on. I almost convinced myself it had been a one-time thing. Then one evening, I found myself back on the parkway, later than I should have been. A storm had rolled through earlier, leaving the air heavy and damp. Fog clung to the lower elevations, creeping up the slopes as night fell. I drove carefully, muscles tight, eyes scanning the road and the trees beyond it. The hum didn't come right away. For a while, there was only the sound of my own car and the distant call of something moving through the woods. When it did return, it was subtle, a faint vibration at the edge of my hearing. My heart sank. It stayed with me as the light faded completely, the road ahead swallowed by darkness and fog. I didn't pull over this time. I didn't slow down more than necessary. I just kept driving, my jaw clenched, my breathing shallow. The hum felt closer than before. I took a curve too fast and felt the back end of the car slip. Just for a second, long enough for panic to flare hot and bright. The hum surged, louder now, pressing in from behind like something eager. I fought the wheel and corrected, my pulse roaring in my ears. The road straightened out, and the sound receded slightly, returning to that steady, patient pace. It toyed with me like that for miles. I don't know how long it followed me. Time stretches on the parkway at night, bending and thinning until minutes feel like hours. Eventually, the road began to descend, and the fog thinned. Lights appeared ahead, town lights, distant but real. The hum faded. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station at the edge of town. I pulled in hard and fast, tires squealing slightly. I got out and walked around the car, half expecting to see fresh damage, fresh marks. There was nothing new. I stood there under the fluorescent lights, hands shaking, trying to calm down. Other people moved around me, ordinary and unaware. I felt like I'd stepped out of a different world. I don't take the parkway at night anymore if I can help it. When I have to, I drive with the radio off and the windows up, listening anyway. Sometimes, when the road is quiet and the trees are close, I think I feel a vibration behind me, just at the edge of perception. I never pull over. I don't know if that's the right choice or not. All I know is that whatever travels those curves unseen doesn't need headlights to find you. It listens, it waits, and if you hear it, it's already close enough to decide whether you're worth keeping. I noticed the sign because I was already looking for one. My gas light had come on a few miles back, that soft amber glow that doesn't panic you right away but sits there quietly, reminding you that time is running out. I'd been on the parkway longer than I meant to be, pushing through fatigue because I just wanted to get home without dropping down into town and adding another 40 minutes to the drive. It was late, not quite midnight, but late enough that the road felt abandoned. No other cars, no distant headlights, just me, the mountains, and the slow ticking countdown on my fuel gauge. That's when I saw it. A hand-painted wooden sign staked into the ground just past a curve. The arrow was crooked, the paint uneven, like someone had done it in a hurry, or without caring much how it looked. GAS plus food 2 miles. The letters were blocky and faded, but legible in my headlights. It didn't look official, but it looked real enough. Homemade signs aren't unusual up there. People sell firewood, honey, boiled peanuts, all kinds of things off back roads. I slowed without thinking, relief washing over me stronger than it should have. 2 miles. I could make that easily. I checked my mirrors, signaled, and turned onto the road the arrow pointed toward. The pavement narrowed almost immediately. The smooth asphalt of the parkway gave way to rougher blacktop, then gravel. The sound of stones popping under my tires echoed too loudly in the trees. The road dipped and twisted, and the forest closed in fast, branches reaching toward my windows until my side mirrors brushed leaves. I told myself it was fine. Places like this don't advertise with neon signs. You find them because you need them. After about a minute, I glanced at my GPS. The screen showed my little blue arrow drifting off the parkway, and then nothing. No road, no label, just green emptiness. A second later, the signal dropped completely. I frowned and tapped the screen, then checked my phone. 1 bar, then none. The screen dimmed and went black as the battery finally gave up. That was when unease crept in. The woods felt thicker here, darker. My headlights seemed weaker somehow, swallowed up by the trees instead of reflecting back the way they should. The air smelled damp and old, like rotting leaves and cold soil. I rolled my window down a crack, listening. No insects, no wind, just the crunch of gravel and my own engine idling too loudly. The road kept going longer than it should have. 2 miles isn't far, even at a cautious speed. I started counting the minutes in my head. 3 passed, then 5. The arrow on the sign replayed in my mind, and I felt a prickle of irritation mixed with worry. Maybe I'd misread it. Maybe it said 5 miles. Or maybe the place was farther back than advertised. Then the road ended. My headlights hit a locked metal gate stretched across the path, rusted and sagging in the middle. Beyond it, the road disappeared into weeds and darkness. A warning sign hung crookedly on the gate, the paint peeling so badly I couldn't make out all the words. What I could read stopped my breath cold. No tresp. The rest was gone, eaten away by rust. I sat there for a moment, engine running, staring at the gate. This was wrong. Even if the business had closed, the road shouldn't just dead end like that. I put the car in reverse, gravel crunching as I backed up a few feet, then turned the wheel to head back the way I'd come. And there was no road behind me. I don't mean it looked different. I mean, it was gone. Where the gravel path should have been was solid forest trees packed tight, undergrowth thick and undisturbed, like no vehicle had passed through in years. My headlights swept over trunks and vines, searching for an opening, for any sign of the path I'd just driven down. There was nothing. Panic hit me hard and fast, a physical thing that tightened my chest and made my hands shake. I spun in my seat, looking back and forth, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't fog or darkness playing tricks on me. The road was gone, replaced completely, seamlessly, like it had never existed. I stepped out of the car despite every instinct screaming at me not to. The night air felt heavier outside, pressing in on me. I walked a few steps toward where the road should have been, shining my flashlight across the ground. Leaves lay undisturbed. No tire tracks, no gravel, just earth and roots. My breathing came fast and shallow. I felt stupid and exposed standing there, like the trees were watching me try to understand something they'd already decided I wasn't meant to. I got back in the car and slammed the door shut, heart pounding. Okay, I muttered to myself. Okay. The word felt useless. I wiped my palms on my jeans and tried to think. Roads don't disappear. That meant one thing. I was turned around. I'd missed something. I'd gone the wrong way somehow. I put the car in drive and eased forward, passing the gate again and continuing beyond it, convinced I'd find a loop or a wider area to turn around. The road narrowed further, barely more than a track now. The trees leaned close enough that branches scraped along the roof, a dry, dragging sound that set my teeth on edge. Minutes stretched. The forest never changed. No lights, no buildings, no signs of life. The gravel thinned until dirt showed through, rutted and uneven. My gas gauge hovered just above empty. Every glance at it made my stomach twist tighter. I started seeing things in the corner of my vision, shapes between trees that vanished when I looked straight at them, reflections in the side mirrors that didn't make sense. I turned the radio on for comfort, then immediately shut it off when static exploded through the speakers, loud and angry. After what felt like an hour, but couldn't have been more than 15 minutes, the trees thinned abruptly. The road widened, smoothing out beneath my tires. My headlights caught reflective paint ahead. I was back on the parkway. I slammed the brakes and stopped dead in the middle of the road, chest heaving. The familiar double yellow lines stretched ahead of me, curving gently through the mountains. Guardrails, mile markers, everything exactly where it should be. I looked down at the dashboard, half expecting some warning light or message. My gas gauge had climbed back up, not full, but noticeably higher than it had been before I turned off. Enough that the low fuel light was gone. Enough that I could get home easily. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, afraid to move, afraid that if I did, something would change again. Eventually, another car appeared in the distance, headlights cresting a curve. Relief flooded me so suddenly it almost hurt. I pulled forward and drove, merging back into the flow of a world that suddenly felt fragile and thin. The rest of the drive passed without incident. When I got home, I checked my phone. It powered on like nothing had happened. No missed calls, no messages. The time said I'd only been gone a few minutes longer than expected. I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, curiosity gnawed at me until I couldn't ignore it. I drove back to the parkway in daylight, telling myself I just wanted closure. I watched the road carefully, mile marker by mile marker, searching for the turnoff. It wasn't there. I drove the stretch 3 times. No sign, no arrow, no place where a road could have been without leaving some trace. Just trees and guardrail and the steady sweep of the mountains. I stopped at a ranger station nearby and asked about it, trying to sound casual. The ranger frowned, then shook his head slowly. He said there hadn't been a road there in decades. Not since a family tried to run a small roadside business off the parkway, selling gas out of old pumps, food out of their kitchen. It was illegal, unsafe. One day, they vanished. No car, no bodies. Just an abandoned gate and a rusted warning sign deeper in the woods. They sealed the road and let the forest take it back. I asked him if anyone ever reported seeing signs for it. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. Sometimes, he said, usually when they're tired, or low on fuel, or just needing something. I don't take the parkway when I'm running on empty anymore. I plan my drives carefully. I ignore handmade signs, no matter how convincing they look. Still, some nights, when I'm half asleep and the road stretches on too long, I catch myself scanning the shoulders, half expecting to see that crooked arrow again. And part of me worries that next time, I won't have enough gas to make it back. I was alone. I know that for a fact, because I remember checking the back seat before I left. I always do. It's a habit I picked up after too many late-night drives, too many stories heard secondhand. I tossed my jacket onto the passenger seat, glanced back at the empty rear bench, and pulled out onto the parkway without another thought. The drive started out quiet in a way that felt normal. The sun had gone down maybe 20 minutes earlier, leaving that long blue-gray twilight that hangs over the mountains before full dark settles in. The trees were already black silhouettes against the sky, crowding the road so close it felt like the parkway was a narrow cut through something that wanted to grow back over it. There were no other cars, no headlights ahead or behind. Just me, the curves, and the steady hum of my tires. About halfway through the stretch I was aiming to cover, I heard it. At first, I didn't recognize it as breathing. It was just a sound, soft, rhythmic, almost lost beneath the engine noise. I thought maybe it was air moving through a vent or something loose rolling around in the back. I turned the fan down. The sound stayed. It was slow, wet, too deliberate to be mechanical. I felt a prickle crawl up the back of my neck. I adjusted the rearview mirror, angling it to catch more of the back seat. The glass showed exactly what I expected to see. Empty upholstery, seatbelts hanging slack, my jacket still bunched on the front seat where I'd left it. Nothing out of place. The breathing continued. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Long drives do that to you. The mountains mess with sound too. Echoes bounce in ways that don't make sense if you're not used to them. I focused on the road, on the faint double yellow line curving ahead of me, and tried to breathe normally. The sound didn't go away. If anything, it grew more distinct when I slowed down for a curve. When I accelerated slightly, it faded just enough to make me question whether I'd really heard it at all. Then I slowed again, and there it was, closer somehow, like whoever or whatever was making it lean forward when the car dipped. I swallowed hard and turned the radio on. Music flooded the car, loud and jarring. For a second, relief washed over me. Then I heard it again, threading through the noise, steady and patient, rising and falling with a cadence that had nothing to do with the song. I didn't turn around. Every instinct I had screamed not to. Something deep and old inside me was certain that if I looked back, something would change. Not necessarily that I'd see something, but that the rules would shift, and whatever was behind me would know I'd acknowledged it. The road felt longer after that. Each curve seemed to stretch on, the darkness between my headlights and the trees swallowing distance. The breathing synced with my movements now. When I eased off the gas, it grew louder, wetter, like lungs filling too slowly. When I sped up, it receded but never vanished. I started talking out loud without meaning to. Just little things, telling myself how much farther I had to go, naming landmarks I recognized. Anything to keep my mind anchored to something real. My voice sounded thin and strange in the enclosed space of the car. I thought about pulling over. The idea flared and died almost immediately. The thought of stopping, of cutting the engine, and sitting in the dark with that sound behind me made my chest tighten painfully. I kept driving. The smell came next. It was faint at first, barely noticeable beneath the lingering scent of old coffee and upholstery. Damp earth, rot. The smell of wet leaves left in a pile too long. It crept forward slowly, like fog, filling the car inch by inch. I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose, then immediately regretted it. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. I wiped them on my jeans without taking my eyes off the road. The idea that someone or something was close enough to smell, close enough to breathe like that, made my skin crawl. I told myself again that I was alone, that I'd checked, that there was no logical way for anyone to be in my back seat. I'd locked the car. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't picked anyone up. The breathing disagreed. By the time the ranger station lights came into view, I was barely holding it together. The little cluster of buildings glowed like a lifeline in the darkness. Fluorescent lights cutting through the trees. Relief hit me so hard it almost made me dizzy. I pulled into the lot too fast, gravel spraying under my tires, and slammed the car into park. The breathing was loud now, right behind my head, slow and deliberate, like whoever it belonged to knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I flung the door open and stumbled out, gulping in cold night air like I'd been underwater. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I ran to the back of the car and yanked the door open hard enough that it banged against the frame. The smell hit me first. It poured out of the car in a wave, thick and unmistakable. Damp earth, rot, something sour underneath it all. I gagged, stumbling back a step. The back seat was empty, but it was soaked. The fabric darkened as if someone had been sitting there for hours, sweating or bleeding or something worse. The seatbelt was twisted, pulled partway out, like it had been used recently. I stood there shaking, staring at the empty space where I'd been so sure something was. A ranger came out of the station, drawn by the noise. He was older, his movements slow and careful, like someone who'd spent a lifetime walking uneven ground. He asked if I was okay. I tried to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. Eventually, I managed to tell him what had happened. Not all of it, just enough. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded once and asked a single question. "Where'd you pick up the hitchhiker?" I stared at him. "I didn't," I said. My voice sounded hoarse, scraped raw. I was alone. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded again, slower this time, like he'd expected that answer. He told me to sit down inside while he took a look at the car. I did as he said, my legs weak beneath me. The station smelled like coffee and old paper, a comforting, human smell that grounded me just enough to keep from shaking apart. I listened as he walked around the car outside, his boots crunching on gravel. When he came back in, he didn't say much, just asked if I was heading straight home. When I nodded, he told me to leave the radio on, keep the windows cracked, and not stop for anyone or anything until I got there. I wanted to ask him what he thought it was. I wanted him to tell me there was a simple explanation, something mechanical or psychological that would make it all make sense. The look on his face told me not to. I drove the rest of the way home in a numb fog. The breathing didn't come back, but I never relaxed enough to be sure it was gone. Every time the car settled after a curve, I tensed, waiting for that wet, patient sound to start up again. When I finally parked in my driveway, dawn was just starting to lighten the sky. I sat there for a long time, staring at my house, gathering the nerve to get out. When I opened the back door again, the seat was dry. No smell, no sign anything had ever been there. I tried to put it behind me. I told myself it had been exhaustion, stress, the power of suggestion. For a while, that worked. Weeks passed, then months. I avoided night drives when I could, but life doesn't always cooperate. The next time it happened, I recognized it immediately. Different road, different night, same sound. This time, I didn't panic. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't speak. I just drove, my jaw clenched, my eyes locked on the road ahead. The breathing stayed with me the whole way, never louder, never softer, like it was content just to be there. When I got home and checked the back seat, there was nothing. No smell, no dampness, just empty fabric and silence. I went back to the ranger station a few days later, under the excuse of returning a brochure I'd taken by accident. The same ranger was there. I asked him, as casually as I could, if anyone else had ever reported something like what I'd experienced. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "More than you'd think," he said. "Always late, always alone, always swear they never picked anyone up." "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "People go missing up here," he said. "Some wander off, some hitch rides and never get where they're going. Mountains don't give back what they take." That night, lying in bed, I listened to the house settle and creak, every sound sharp in the quiet. For the first time since it happened, I wondered if whatever had been in my back seat had gotten out when I stopped, or if it never needed to. Sometimes, when I drive now, especially on empty roads, I feel a familiar tension settle between my shoulders. I keep the radio low. I don't use the rearview mirror more than I have to, because every now and then, just as the car slows for a curve, I swear I hear it again. Slow, wet, patient, and I know better than to turn around. I didn't plan to be on the parkway that late. That's the truth of it. I'd left later than intended, lingered too long at a friend's place, convinced myself I knew the road well enough to make up time. I'd driven that stretch dozens of times before, always during daylight, when the mountains looked patient and familiar. At night, they felt different, closer, like they leaned in when you weren't looking. The road was empty in that way only mountain roads get after midnight. No headlights ahead, none behind. Just the steady hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional reflective marker flashing past in my peripheral vision. The trees formed a black wall on either side, tall and unbroken, swallowing what little moonlight there was. I kept the windows up despite the mild air. Something about the darkness outside felt intrusive, like it might reach in if given the chance. I was rounding a sharp curve when my headlights caught something pale on the road. I slowed instinctively, foot easing off the gas as my brain tried to make sense of it. Letters came into focus, uneven and smeared, stretched wide across both lanes. Turn back. The words were painted in white, thick and sloppy, like someone had used a roller or a brush too big for the job. The paint looked wet enough to shine in the headlights. My heart thudded once, hard, then settled into a faster rhythm. I scanned the shoulders for cones, barricades, anything that would explain it. There was nothing, no signs, no flashing lights, just forest and silence. I rolled over the letters slowly, half expecting the tires to slip on fresh paint. They didn't. The road felt normal beneath me. I told myself it was some kind of prank. Teenagers, maybe. Someone with too much time and bad judgment. Still, my grip on the steering wheel tightened. I drove on, eyes flicking constantly between the road ahead and the edges of the pavement. The sense of being watched crept in gradually, subtle enough that I almost ignored it. Almost. Every bend felt sharper than it should have been. Every shadow seemed deeper, thicker. I checked my mirrors even though I knew there'd be nothing there. About a mile later, the second message appeared. Too late. These letters were larger, more jagged, as if whoever painted them had been in a hurry or angry or both. The paint was streaked, dragged by something heavy or uneven. I slowed to a crawl, my pulse pounding in my ears. A cold weight settled in my stomach, the kind that comes when your body understands danger before your mind catches up. My headlights flickered, just once at first. A brief dimming, like a blink. Then again, longer this time. The dashboard lights fluttered, and the radio cut out mid-song, leaving a hollow silence behind. I muttered a curse under my breath and tapped the steering wheel, as if that might steady things. The road ahead seemed to vanish. It wasn't immediate. There was no dramatic drop or sudden black hole. Just a subtle wrongness, a darkness that didn't reflect light the way it should have. I eased forward another few feet, squinting, and then my headlights finally caught the edge. The asphalt was gone, not cracked or buckled gone. The road ended in a jagged break that dropped away into blackness, the mountainside falling off so steeply that my headlights couldn't find the bottom. Loose gravel skittered under my tires as I slammed the brakes, the seatbelt biting into my shoulder. The car shuddered and stopped inches from the edge. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I sat there staring into the empty space ahead, my breath coming in shallow bursts. One more second of speed, one moment of distraction, and I would have gone over. The thought made my hands tremble uncontrollably. I put the car in park and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet was overwhelming. No radio, no engine, just the faint ticking of cooling metal and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees below. I rolled the window down a crack, listening for anything, voices, machinery, some sign that help might be nearby. There was nothing. The smell of wet earth drifted up from the drop-off, sharp and cold. I leaned forward, peering into the darkness, and immediately regretted it. The void seemed to lean back, an endless, waiting thing. I pulled away and rested my forehead against the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe. That's when it hit me. The words on the road, turn back, too late. They were facing the wrong way. A chill crawled up my spine as I twisted in my seat, craning my neck to look behind me through the rear window. The letters I'd driven over were reversed from this angle, readable only to someone coming from the opposite direction, someone driving toward the collapse, someone who wouldn't have time to stop. The realization sat heavy in my chest, pressing the air out of me. I wasn't the intended recipient of those warnings. I just happened to be on the wrong side of them at the right moment. I don't know how long I sat there after that. Minutes, maybe. It felt longer. Eventually, survival instincts kicked in. I put the car back in gear and reversed slowly, carefully, until I had enough room to turn around. The maneuver felt clumsy and exposed, like turning your back on something dangerous. Every instinct told me to hurry, but I forced myself to stay slow and deliberate. As soon as I was facing the other direction, I drove. I didn't look back at the collapse. I didn't slow down until the road straightened and my hands stopped shaking enough to trust myself again. The headlights steadied. The radio came back on in a burst of static, then music, as if nothing had happened. The rest of the drive passed in a blur. I don't remember much of it beyond the constant tension in my shoulders and the way every reflective sign made me flinch. When I finally reached home, dawn was starting to lighten the sky. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the house, replaying the moment over and over in my head. I didn't sleep much that day. By afternoon, exhaustion and daylight conspired to make it feel unreal, like a bad dream stitched together from stress and poor visibility. I told myself the road must have been under repair, that the collapse had been temporary, maybe covered up by mourning. The painted warnings could have been part of some rushed emergency measure I just misunderstood. Still, I couldn't shake the image of those words, smeared and urgent. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I turned on the local news while making coffee, half expecting to hear something about a road closure or late-night construction. What I got instead made my stomach drop. There'd been a fatal crash on the parkway overnight. A single vehicle had gone off the road at a sharp curve and plunged down the mountainside. The driver was pronounced dead at the scene. The report said visibility was poor, but there were no mentions of warnings or hazards. No road damage, no closure. I stared at the screen, coffee forgotten, as they showed footage of the area in daylight. The road was intact, smooth, unbroken, no sign of collapse, no white paint, just asphalt winding neatly through green trees, innocent and whole. I drove out there later that week, telling myself I needed closure. I parked at a pull-off and walked to the spot I was sure had been the edge. I recognized the curve immediately, the angle of the trees, the way the land fell away beyond the guardrail. There was a guardrail now. It looked old, weathered, like it had been there for years. I ran my hand along the metal, cold and solid beneath my fingers. The pavement was clean, no streaks, no residue, nothing to suggest anyone had ever painted a word there, let alone two. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening to cars pass, trying to reconcile what I'd seen with what was in front of me. Eventually, I left, feeling foolish and unsettled in equal measure. Life moved on, as it tends to. Weeks passed, then months. The memory dulled, but it never fully faded. Every time I drove that stretch, I slowed at the curve, my eyes scanning the road for signs that weren't there. I never saw them again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the timing of it all, about how precise it was, how those messages appeared just long enough to save one person and fail another. I wonder who painted them, when, and why they disappeared without a trace. I also think about direction, about how warnings only matter if you're facing the right way, how easy it is to miss them entirely if you're coming from the other side, moving too fast, trusting the road to be what it's always been. I don't talk about it much. When I do, people nod politely and suggest stress or imagination. I don't argue. There's no proof to offer, just a memory and a quiet certainty that something out there tried, in its own limited way, to intervene. Sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and the road ahead curves sharply into darkness, I catch myself slowing down for no clear reason. My eyes flick to the pavement, searching for pale shapes that aren't there. And every now and then, I think about the person who never saw the warning. I wonder if they noticed anything at all before it was too late. I didn't mean to follow them. That's the part that bothers me most, even now. There was no conscious decision, no moment where I said, yes, I'll trust this stranger on a dark mountain road. 1 second, the parkway ahead of me was empty. The next, there were red taillights cutting through the fog like they'd always been there, steady and low, moving just slow enough to feel deliberate. It was late enough that the mountains had gone quiet in that unnatural way they do, when everything living seems to have pulled back. No crickets, no wind, just the hum of my tires and the faint whine of my engine climbing the grade. Fog drifted in sheets across the road, not thick enough to blind me, but dense enough to soften the world, dulling edges and swallowing distance. The taillights ahead glowed dully through it, warped and stretched, like they were farther away than they really were. I eased off the gas without thinking, matching their speed. They stayed right where they were, neither pulling away nor slowing further. Familiarity crept in, an odd comfort. Someone else was out here. Someone who knew this road well enough to drive it like this, calm and unhurried. Every time I thought about passing, the fog thickened just enough to make me hesitate. It would roll down off the trees and across the asphalt in a pale wave, turning the double yellow line into a suggestion instead of a boundary. I told myself it wasn't worth the risk. Better to follow until the fog broke. Better to let someone else lead. The parkway started to feel strange after a while. Not immediately. It was subtle, the way wrong things often are. The curves seemed to stretch longer than they should have, the road bending and bending without ever straightening out. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard and frowned. I should have been farther along by now. I passed a mile marker, or thought I did, but the number didn't register before it slipped past my window. The next one never came. The tail lights never wavered. They didn't brake suddenly or drift in the lane. They didn't signal. They moved with a smooth certainty that made my own driving feel clumsy by comparison. I tried to memorize the shape of the car ahead of me, but the fog refused to cooperate. All I ever saw were those lights, red and unwavering, floating just above the road. A low unease settled in my chest. I rolled my shoulders, trying to shake it off. Long drives do that to you, especially alone. The parkway has a way of stretching time, of making miles feel heavier than they are. I told myself that was all it was. Still, when I glanced in my rearview mirror, I felt a flicker of relief that there were no headlights behind me, just empty road and fog. The first pullout appeared without warning. One moment there were trees crowding the shoulder, the next there was a dark opening, a gravel turnout carved into the mountainside. The taillights ahead slowed, then turned smoothly into it. I felt a rush of relief so strong it almost made me laugh. Whatever this was, it was ending. I followed them in, tires crunching softly as I rolled to a stop a few car lengths back. The engine noise from the car ahead cut off. I waited for a door to open, for someone to step out, stretch, light a cigarette, do something human. The taillights stayed on for a few seconds longer, bathing the fog in red, then clicked off one by one. Silence settled around us, thick and heavy. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening. The mountains pressed in close, trees looming just beyond the reach of my headlights. My breath sounded loud in my ears. After a moment, I shut my engine off too. The sudden quiet made my ears ring. I opened my door and stepped out into the cold air. The fog felt damp against my skin, clinging to my clothes. I took a few cautious steps toward the other car, my shoes crunching softly on gravel. Up close, it looked wrong. Dust coated it in a thick, even layer, dulling the paint until I couldn't tell what color it had been. The windows were opaque with grime. The tires were half sunk into the gravel like they'd been sitting there for a long time. I reached out and brushed my fingers along the hood, leaving a clean streak behind. It was cold, not just cool from the night air, cold in a way that suggested it hadn't been warm in a very long time. I frowned, my pulse quickening. That didn't make sense. I'd been following this car. I'd watched it move, watched it turn in here. I peered through the driver's side window, wiping a small circle clear with my sleeve. The interior was empty, no keys in the ignition, no personal items on the seat. The steering wheel was cracked and worn, the kind of wear that comes from decades of use, not a few hours on the road. A knot tightened in my stomach. I took a step back and looked around, suddenly very aware of how alone I was. The pullout was small, barely wide enough for two cars. Beyond it, the ground dropped away sharply into darkness. The trees on the uphill side stood close, their branches tangled and dense. The fog swallowed everything beyond a few feet. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin and wrong. It disappeared into the mist without an echo. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the car had been towed here earlier, and I'd mistaken something else for taillights. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on my eyes. The mind fills in gaps, especially in conditions like this. I repeated those thoughts like a mantra as I turned back toward my own car. That's when I realized I couldn't see the parkway anymore. The pullout ended in a wall of fog where the road should have been. No faint glow of asphalt, no suggestion of the double yellow line, just trees and darkness, like the mountains had closed ranks behind me. Panic flared, hot and sudden. I jogged to the edge of the pullout and shined my phone's flashlight into the fog. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the mist, illuminating trunks and underbrush where the road should have been. I spun in a slow circle, heart hammering, checking every angle. There was no road. My phone buzzed weakly in my hand, then the screen went black. Dead. I cursed under my breath, shoving it back into my pocket. My car was still there, idling quietly, its headlights illuminating the gravel. That was something. That was real. I climbed back inside and slammed the door, the sound echoing strangely. I started the engine and put the car in drive, aiming for where the parkway had been. The tires rolled forward a few feet, then bumped gently against something solid. I leaned out the window and shined my headlights toward the obstruction. Trees, thick, unbroken forest, their roots pushing up through the ground where asphalt should have been. It looked old, untouched, like there had never been a road there at all. My mouth went dry. I reversed and turned the wheel, driving slowly around the pullout, searching for another exit. There wasn't one, just trees and drop-off and fog. The realization settled over me in a suffocating wave. I was trapped in a place that shouldn't exist, led here by something that wasn't what it seemed. I don't know how long I drove in circles like that. Time lost its meaning, stretching and folding in on itself. The fog never thinned. The trees never changed. My headlights carved the same shapes over and over again, familiar and wrong. At some point, the sky began to lighten. It was so gradual I almost missed it. A faint paling at the edges of the fog, a suggestion of gray where there had only been black. Hope flickered weakly in my chest. I kept driving, my eyes burning, my body aching with tension. Then, just as suddenly as it had vanished, the parkway was there again. One moment my headlights were illuminating trees. The next they spilled out onto smooth asphalt, the double yellow line bright and solid beneath my tires. I lurched forward in surprise, barely correcting in time to keep from crossing into the oncoming lane. The fog thinned rapidly, retreating back into the woods. Dawn crept over the mountains, washing the world in pale light. I pulled over and sat there shaking, staring at the perfectly normal road ahead of me. There was no pullout, no gravel, no sign that anything out of the ordinary had happened. I drove the rest of the way in a daze, flinching every time I saw red lights ahead of me. When I finally reached a town and stopped for gas, I must have looked half crazed. The attendant asked if I was okay. I told him I'd gotten turned around on the parkway. He nodded like he'd heard that before. I tried to forget about it. For a long time I succeeded. The memory dulled, softened by distance and daylight. Then, one evening, I came across an old newspaper article while researching something unrelated. A missing persons report from decades ago. A car gone missing on a foggy night, last seen on the parkway. The description made my stomach drop. Same model, same year, same color once I imagined the dust wiped away. The article mentioned a witness, another driver who'd claimed to have followed the car for miles before losing sight of it. The witness was never found. I closed my laptop and sat there in the quiet, listening to the house creak around me. Since that night, I avoid driving the parkway in fog if I can help it. When I can't, I keep my eyes fixed on the road ahead, no matter how comforting it might feel to let someone else lead. Because sometimes, when the fog rolls in just right, I still see red taillights ahead of me, moving slow and steady, like they know exactly where they're going. And I know better now than to follow. I was already tired before the knocking started. The kind of tired that comes from driving too long, with nothing but your own thoughts and the slow bend of the road to keep you company. The parkway at night has a way of draining you, not with noise or danger, but with sameness. Tree line, curve, guardrail, darkness beyond the headlights that feels heavier than it should. I'd been on that stretch for almost an hour, headed home later than planned, telling myself I just needed to push through another 40 minutes and I'd be back somewhere familiar. The first knock was so subtle I almost missed it. Just a dull thump under the tires, like I'd rolled over a thick branch or a loose piece of asphalt. I eased off the gas and waited for the road to smooth out again. It didn't. A few seconds later, it came again. Same sound, same place, directly beneath me. I glanced at the dashboard, half expecting a warning light to flare up. Nothing did. The car felt fine. No vibration through the wheel, no pull to either side. Just that sound, deep and muted, like someone tapping from the other side of a wall. I rolled the window down, letting the cold mountain air spill in. The night smelled like wet leaves and stone. The sound came again, clearer now without the glass in the way. Thump, not sharp, not metallic, almost deliberate. I slowed more, my foot hovering over the brake. The knocking slowed with me. When I picked up speed again, it followed. 3 knocks this time, evenly spaced, matching the rhythm of my tires. That's when the unease set in. Not panic yet, just that quiet tightening in your chest when something doesn't fit and your brain hasn't caught up enough to tell you why. I told myself it had to be road noise. Maybe a loose plate under the car, maybe something caught in the undercarriage. Still, the idea of something mechanical didn't sit right. Machines don't adjust their timing like that. They don't wait. I eased onto the shoulder and brought the car to a stop. The engine idled softly. The knocking stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt thick, pressurized. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, listening hard, afraid that if I moved too quickly I'd break whatever fragile balance had settled. After a full minute passed without another sound, I laughed under my breath, the release shaky and forced. "Get a grip," I muttered, though the words didn't carry much conviction. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching loud in the stillness. The night closed in around me immediately, the darkness beyond the guardrail, absolute. I crouched near the front tire, then the back, looking for anything obvious. A rock, a piece of debris. There was nothing. Feeling ridiculous, I lowered myself closer to the ground, one knee pressing into the cold pavement. I leaned forward, pressing my ear near the road surface. At first, I heard nothing but my own breathing and the faint hiss of wind through the trees. Then, so faint I thought I imagined it, there was another sound. Not a knock this time, something softer. Amurmur. I froze, every muscle locking up. The sound grew clearer as I held still, whispers. Not one voice, but many, layered on top of each other, muffled as if coming through dirt and stone. I couldn't make out words, just tone, panic, strain. The sound of people speaking urgently but too far away to be understood. My stomach dropped. I pushed myself upright too fast, stumbling back from the edge of the road. The whispers stopped the moment I moved, leaving behind a silence that rang in my ears. I stood there shaking, staring down at the asphalt like it might split open. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Wind through a culvert, water moving underground, sound traveling in strange ways through the mountains. None of it accounted for the shape of what I'd heard, the way it had felt directed, human. I didn't waste time getting back into the car. I slammed the door shut and pulled onto the road, accelerating harder than I should have. For a brief stretch, there was nothing. Just the road unspooling ahead of me, curves coming and going, my heart hammering loud enough to drown out my thoughts. Then the knocking came back, louder this time, faster. Not just under the tires anymore, but spread out beneath the whole length of the car, like multiple points striking from below. Thump, 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 uneven now, angry. The steering wheel trembled faintly in my hands. "Stop it," I said aloud, my voice cracking. I don't know who I was talking to, the car, the road, myself. The knocking followed every adjustment I made. When I slowed, it grew heavier, each impact landing with a sickening weight. When I sped up, it quickened, like it was trying to keep pace. The sound seeped into my bones, vibrating through the seat and up my spine. I thought about stopping again, about pulling off and running, but the memory of those whispers kept me rooted behind the wheel. Whatever was under the road didn't feel contained. It felt aware. The parkway dipped and rose, the headlights carving narrow tunnels through the dark. Mile markers blurred past, then stopped appearing altogether, though I didn't realize it at the time. All my focus was on staying between the lines, on keeping the car steady as the noise below me intensified. The knocking built to a frantic rhythm as I approached a bridge I barely remembered from daytime drives. The road straightened briefly, the guardrails replaced by concrete barriers, the drop below hidden in darkness. As my tires hit the bridge deck, the knocking reached a fever pitch. Then it stopped. The sudden absence of sound was almost worse. I coasted across the bridge, my breath coming in shallow gasps, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. By the time I reached the other side, my hands were numb from gripping the wheel so hard. I didn't slow down until the lights of a small town finally appeared in the distance. Civilization, thin as it was, felt like safety. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a long time before getting out, letting my heart rate settle. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't think about it. Daylight has a way of shrinking night fears, sanding down their edges until they feel manageable. Still, The memory clung to me. The sound, the voices, the way the road had felt alive beneath me. I stopped at a diner near the parkway, the kind of place locals linger, and asked the man behind the counter if he'd ever heard anything strange driving that stretch at night. He gave me a look I couldn't read, then asked exactly where I meant. When I told him, his mouth tightened. He wiped his hands on a towel and leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "That part's built over old ground," he said. "More than just dirt and rock." I pressed him, and after a moment, he sighed. Told me the story like he told it before, but never to anyone who'd asked outright. Long before the parkway was cut through the mountains, there'd been small settlements tucked into the hollows, poor folks, coal families, people who didn't have much reason to leave, and even fewer ways to do it. When the land was claimed and the road planned, some places were cleared. Others were simply buried. Tunnels collapsed, foundations filled in, time and earth sealing over what had been there. "Sometimes," he said, staring into his coffee, "things don't settle right." I asked him about the knocking, about the voices. He didn't answer right away, just shook his head slowly. "Mountains remember," he said finally, "and sometimes they press back." I didn't drive that stretch again for a long time. Months passed, then years. Life moved on, as it does, and the memory dulled just enough that I could convince myself it had been stress, exhaustion, sound carrying in strange ways. Then one winter night, I found myself back on the parkway, detoured by weather and poor planning. Snow dusted the trees, the road dark and slick beneath my tires. I told myself it would be fine. It was early. I was alert. The first knock came just past the same bend. My chest tightened, a cold dread spreading through me. I didn't stop this time. I didn't slow. I kept my eyes forward and drove. My jaw clenched so tight it ached. The knocking followed, steady and patient. Beneath me, beneath the road, something kept time. As I crossed the bridge, the sound faded again, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the long memory of whispers I'd never quite forgotten. I still drive the parkway. Sometimes you don't have a choice. But every time I pass that stretch, I roll the windows up and keep the radio low. I listen for changes in the sound of the tires, for anything out of place. And every once in a while, when the night is very still and the road very quiet, I swear I can hear it again. Not knocking this time, just the faintest suggestion of movement beneath the asphalt, waiting. I was already tired before I ever saw him. That kind of tired that settles in behind your eyes and makes the road feel longer than it is. I'd been on the parkway for hours, chasing the last stretch of daylight and losing it mile by mile as the mountains swallowed the sun. The weather had turned without warning, as it tends to do up there. Fog clung low to the road, not thick enough to stop me, but dense enough to dull the edges of everything. Trees blurred together, mile markers slipped past unnoticed. The world shrank to what my headlights could touch. I remember thinking I should have pulled off earlier, found a motel, slept. But I was stubborn, and I told myself I'd driven this road before. I knew it well enough. That was the lie I kept repeating as the night settled in. That's when I saw the hazard lights. They flashed ahead of me, slow and steady, bleeding red and amber through the fog. At first, I thought it was another driver pulled over with trouble. Then I realized it was a Park Service truck, angled just enough to block part of the lane. I eased off the gas and rolled closer, my tires humming on wet asphalt. The truck looked old, older than I expected, boxier, heavier somehow, like it belonged to another decade. A ranger stood beside it, right at the edge of my headlights. He raised one hand, palm out, and I stopped. I don't know why my first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion. Something about him didn't fit. His uniform looked wrong, not torn or dirty, just outdated. The patch on his shoulder was an older design I'd only seen in photos. His hat sat low on his brow, casting his face in shadow, and when he stepped closer, I noticed his movements were stiff, almost rehearsed. "Evening," he said. His voice was flat, calm in a way that didn't quite reach reassuring. I rolled my window down partway. Cold air poured in, carrying the smell of damp leaves and rain-soaked earth. "Everything okay?" I asked. He nodded once. "Dangerous conditions ahead," he said. "Road's not safe tonight. I recommend you turn back." It was a reasonable warning. Sensible, even. Still, something tightened in my chest. The way he spoke felt practiced, like he was reciting lines he'd memorized a long time ago, and never questioned since. "How far ahead?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "You don't want to be on it." I glanced past him, down the stretch of road disappearing into fog and darkness. Nothing looked especially worse than what I'd already driven through. No downed trees, no flashing lights beyond his truck, no obvious signs of an accident. "Is there a detour?" I asked. "No," he said, "a beat too quickly. Best to turn around." I looked back at him then, really looked. His face was pale, almost gray in the wash of my headlights. His eyes were dark, reflecting nothing. There was no condensation in the air when he breathed, even though mine fogged the window immediately. "What about the next pull-off?" I asked. "Somewhere to stop?" He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Not tonight." The silence stretched between us. Fog curled around his boots, drifting low across the pavement like it was alive. I felt suddenly exposed, sitting there in my car, engine idling, one foot hovering over the brake. "All right," I said finally. "Thanks for the heads up." He nodded again, the same stiff motion as before. "Drive safe," he said. "Turn back." I rolled the window up, signaled, and pulled past him. I don't know why I did it. Pride, maybe, or exhaustion, or that stubborn little voice that hates being told what to do. Part of me expected him to step out again, to wave or shout or flash his lights. He didn't. In my mirror, his truck stayed where it was, hazard lights blinking steadily, the ranger standing beside it, watching me disappear into the fog. The road felt different almost immediately. It's hard to explain without sounding dramatic, but the parkway seemed to narrow, even though I knew it hadn't. The curves tightened. The fog thickened in patches, swallowing my headlights in uneven waves. I slowed down, my grip tightening on the wheel. The sense of being watched crept back in, that prickling awareness between the shoulders. I kept expecting to see another ranger truck, another warning, something concrete to justify that uneasy feeling. Instead, the road stayed empty. Mile markers stopped appearing. I didn't notice at first. It was only after I checked my GPS and realized it hadn't updated in a while that I started counting them in my head. The numbers should have been dropping steadily. They weren't there at all. Just stretches of dark road and trees crowding in on both sides. Eventually, I passed a sign listing on-duty rangers for the night. It was one of those simple metal boards near a turnout, names and contact numbers neatly arranged. I slowed as I passed it, shining my headlights across the reflective surface. His name wasn't there. I told myself that didn't mean anything. Shift changes happen. Names get missed. Still, unease gnawed at me. I kept driving, my eyes flicking constantly between the road ahead and the mirrors. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of tension and fatigue. Nothing happened, exactly. No accidents, no sudden drops or fallen trees. Just that heavy, oppressive sense that I was somewhere I wasn't meant to be, lingering longer than I should. By the time I reached the end of the parkway, the sky was starting to lighten with false dawn. I pulled off at the first exit and sat there for a while, engine running, hands trembling slightly on the wheel. When I finally drove on, the world felt sharper, louder, normal in a way I hadn't realized I'd missed. I didn't think about the ranger again until the next morning. I stopped at a small ranger station near where I'd exited, planning to ask about road conditions and maybe mention the warning I'd gotten. The place was quiet, the air inside smelling of old coffee and pine cleaner. A younger ranger sat behind the desk, flipping through paperwork. "Hey," I said. "I had a ranger flag me down last night up on the parkway. Said conditions were dangerous ahead. I just wanted to check what that was about." He looked up. "Where exactly?" I told him the mile marker as best I could remember. His expression shifted, not alarmed, but cautious. "What'd he look like?" he asked. I described the uniform, the truck, the way he spoke. The ranger's pen stilled. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "You're sure about the uniform?" "Pretty sure," I said. "It looked old." He nodded slowly. "We haven't used that style in a long time." A knot formed in my stomach. "So who was he?" The ranger glanced toward the back office, then lowered his voice. "There was a man," he said. "Ranger assigned to that section years ago. Died during a storm." I waited. "He tried to stop a driver from continuing," the ranger went on. "Road was washed out ahead. Visibility was bad. The driver didn't listen." "What happened?" "He got hit," the ranger said simply. "Truck skidded, took them both off the road." My mouth felt dry. "And people see him?" The ranger hesitated. Some say they do, usually late, usually during bad weather. Why? I asked. He met my eyes then, his expression serious. If he talked to you, he said, it means the road wanted you, and he argued for you. I laughed, a short, nervous sound. That's not funny. He didn't smile. I'm not joking. I left soon after that, my head spinning. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I replayed the encounter again and again, picking apart every detail. The flat voice, the outdated uniform, the way he'd insisted I turn back. That night, sleep came fitfully. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw hazard lights flashing in fog. Weeks passed, then months. I avoided the parkway whenever I could, took longer routes, drove during daylight, told myself the whole thing had been a coincidence layered over exhaustion and suggestion. Eventually, life pushed me back onto that road. It was another late drive, another stretch of mountains swallowed by fog. I told myself it would be different this time, that I'd imagined the rest. The warning, the story. As I rounded a familiar curve, my headlights caught something reflective ahead. Hazard lights. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. The truck was there again, angled just so, lights flashing steadily. The ranger stood beside it, one hand raised, palm out. I slowed. I stopped. He stepped closer, exactly as before. Same uniform, same shadowed face. Evening, he said. I didn't roll my window down. Dangerous conditions ahead, he continued, voice calm and flat. I recommend you turn back. My hands shook on the wheel. I listened last time, I said through the glass. I turned back. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering that. Good. What happens if I don't? I asked. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not anger, not sadness, something like exhaustion. I won't be there, he said. I swallowed. Why do you keep doing this? He looked past me, down the road, disappearing into fog. Someone has to. The silence stretched. Fog curled low around his boots, just as it had before. Turn back, he said again. I did. I don't know how many times I've been spared. I don't know how many warnings he has left. All I know is that sometimes, when I'm driving late and the weather turns bad, I catch sight of hazard lights flickering in the distance. And every time, I turn around. Because somewhere in those mountains, a man is still standing in the road, arguing with something that wants us all.